Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Mark Heywood, and I'm going to be your host and facilitator for this hour-long session on why operational maturity matters. I've got a number of roles today. One, to make sure that we keep to time. Two, to make sure that we keep our guests honest and on track. And three, to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask questions. I have my chat box open on this screen here, so I'll be ducking from the conversation to your comments and questions, which we'll try and get to as we go. Now, I hope that in return for your time, my guests and I can give you some key takeaways and nuggets in exchange for the hour that we're here with you for. Now, for many years, I, like you, was a practitioner in this space. I was an operational resilience practitioner, just like my guest. So a lot of what we're going to discuss today really resonates with me, and I really hope it does for you too. I'm delighted to be joined by three people today. Let me introduce them in turn. Two of them work for Cutover, who are sponsoring this particular session. Firstly, Steve Piggott. Hi, Steve, Head of Operational Resilience Global Accounts. A couple of decades, 2.5 decades working with customers like you, enterprise-wide customers, to develop confident, executable resilience capabilities across global IT estates. Also, Darren Lea. Darren, hi, good to be with you today. Senior Customer Success Manager, a technology professional with, again, a couple of decades experience in financial services. And last but not least, I am delighted that we have John Rosato, the CEO of CS Technology. CS Technology was founded in DC in the early 90s. Today has clients all over the world, offices in the US, the UK, where I am right now, and Australia. But first, Steve, I'm sure everybody's seen the blurb about this session. Why are we talking about this today? Why of all days? Why of all topics? Why does operational maturity matter?
Fair question, Mark, and I'll share my perspective with you. It's really that operational maturity, regardless of the vertical that you work in, has one common objective. And that's really to make the consumption of your products and services secure, simple, repeatable, and easy to consume. And a well thought out IT estate strategy based on CST's plan, build, run methodology provides an execution model that has resiliency built in. So here we are.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Right, John, let me start with you as our special guest. You're in the business that Steve just highlighted, the business he just outlined. You help customers, not just in FS, but across all verticals, all industries, as they attempt to establish some form of 24/7 by 365 sense and state of operational maturity. Give us a sense of what it is that you do at CS Technology.
Sure, Mark, and thanks again for everybody for joining us today. Since COVID, I think we've seen an acceleration of digital across verticals. And really what's that's driven from a technology infrastructure perspective is an acute focus on service resilience and uptime, specifically around how to architect it and ultimately how to deliver user experience, whether I'm sitting in a cafe or at my home or at the office. Being able to deliver a highly resilient, high-performing service has always been top of mind, but I think more so now than ever. Moreover, I think the investments that our technology counterparts are particularly focusing on is, one, how do I serve the business better? And that starts with, one, providing a stable service at the foundation, and two, providing the visibility from applications all the way down through core infrastructure and components. And so a lot of focus, both external regulators and otherwise, has been focused on the concept of visibility, on transparency, on driving velocity of change, on helping accelerate the journey to digital or to cloud or to you name it. The focus has always been there across vertical. And so quite frankly, Mark, we've seen a lot of focus on operational maturity because I think any transformational journey, as we've all seen, starts with stability at its core and then branches out from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's about building better business outcomes, right? And I think we'd all believe and buy into that. Let me pivot. Darren, let me bring you in. I know that there is an established partnership between CS Technology and Cutover, but when a company like John's delivers, whether it be cloud adoption, as he said, it could be application rationalization, infosec, cyber, it doesn't really matter. What's the role that Cutover plays in that partnership, in that process of working with clients?
Yeah, so Cutover is the orchestration and observation execution platform that can assimilate all of the transformational work that John was speaking about that CST executes against. Cutover is being heavily used to plan and execute single and multi-geo, multi-facility workload migrations. And our execution platform is also being used for SAP and Workday migrations, as well as other application transformations multi-geo cloud migrations and deployments, and building power downs. But essentially, any complex, manual, typically spreadsheet-based initiative. And we focus in on how we can maximize resource utilization, effort, and time through orchestration of that activity, but also interdependence mapping, providing real-time observability, auditability of every event, and making use of same platform comms, as well as providing a 12+ month view of your schedule for release and change, migrations, any resilience events that are planned. And to maximize CST's customers' investment in tools, we also provide integrations with ITSM tools, so ServiceNow, Remedy, and others, comms platforms, so think Slack, Microsoft Teams, and DevOps tools, so Jenkins, Ansible, all of which provide automation capabilities, but all on the Cutover orchestration and observability platform.
Yeah, and just to add to what Darren was saying, Mark, I think we've seen since the founding of the company in 1992, it's always been at the intersection of business process infrastructure and where those assets reside, whether on a premise, a corporate headquarters premise, or in a data center or in a cloud, or today on the edge. And fundamentally, as we see the proliferation over time of Internet of Things concepts and sensors and the rest, and we're trying to understand our customers digitally, whether it's in a retail store, it's a financial services branch, what we typically find is that the organizations themselves must adapt to handle this, I'll call it proliferation of data, of outcomes that we're supposed to deliver for our clients all around. And so Cutover, in working with Cutover, what we've done is, one, I think integrated or helped support from a digital platform perspective through increasing the velocity of change, providing the digital footprint, so to speak, as to how change happens across an organization, and ultimately providing visibility, as I alluded to earlier, from top down has always been key. Moreover, I think that organizations have changed, right? We've gone from, a life cycle plan, build, run, and siloed from an engineering and ops perspective, and gone more to a DevOps piece because of the competitive pressures that are driving these businesses to release changes that much faster. And so from our perspective, it's how do we help our customers transform from what I refer to as analog process into digital? What does that actually mean? And I'm sure everybody in the audience here can talk about the mountains of spreadsheets and Visio diagrams and SharePoint sites where it's hard to find and understand what exists within their current estate. And so what we've tried to do with our customers is not only guide them on their journeys to reach a business outcome or to meet a technology goal, but at the same time provide one stone to kill multiple birds, so to speak, where we're providing the operational stability and the ongoing digital footprints required to cultivate change in a very dynamic way.
And John, the beauty of this partnership is the actual CST discovery and strategy engagements can execute on Cutover, the plan, as can the actual implementation of the customer's transformational outcomes into a new state of operational maturity, the build, and to sustain operational integrity, the run, around release change, cloudification, cyber, regulatory, crisis management, incident response, ITDR, BCM. They can all live on the orchestration and observability execution platform as a life cycle process of human and machine interaction.
Yeah, I get it, Steve. I'm a buyer. I really am. I can completely understand, plan, design, run as a life cycle process. I get it. There is people are on a journey across the world to transform IT estates, but that journey, it has to start somewhere, right? We have to prioritize, I guess. So John, let's get specific. What is CST focusing on? Can you give us your top 3 focus areas at the moment as you go about helping your clients achieve their objectives?
Yeah, sure, Mark. And that's a great question. And I'll start in the last 12 to 18 months, obviously during COVID, and now as we hopefully are seeing the light at the end of the tunnel coming out of COVID, and where we're starting to see investment across the board. As I alluded to earlier, we've all heard in industry trade rags, you name it, this concept of digital movement to the cloud, providing dynamic capabilities, etc. When it comes to digital, I think there's a couple things to understand. One is the low-hanging fruit around automation and understanding how to provide quick returns back to the business and reduce cost and improve performance and do what's necessary, what I'll call the hygiene to sustain competitive edge in this marketplace. The next piece I'll say up the stack is around understanding customer dynamics and use cases and how to integrate technology as more of everyday being, right? So technology becoming more of the business across verticals, understanding no longer that it's no longer just a TCO driven initiative. It's also what's the value at stake? How much competitive displacement am I creating through investing in digital, and how do I ascribe value? So when we traditionally made pitches to technology leaders, it was always about cost savings or return. Now it's about value at stake, which encompasses what I'll call KPIs or digital KPIs that are now different given the existing environment, right? So it's not only return on capital, but it could be, for a retailer, it could be measuring dwell time in front of a specific product or wayfinding. It could be for an insurance agency, it could be how fast do I process claims. We are starting to see the evolution and the integration of what I'll call the business and technology front, which is all the more necessary to understand the core applications and services that reside within your organizations. And so many a times we'd show up and somebody would say, the board believes that we've got super resilient services. Everybody's signed off on it. And then the test comes or the outage comes and we can't fail over and we can't deliver the change that we talked about from a business case perspective. And so what I would say is in order to attain some of those outlier, or I'll call leading capabilities as it relates to digital, many of our clients are focusing on service resilience. They're focusing on application performance monitoring. They're focusing on optimal hosting as it relates to their applications, not just cloud for the sake of cloud, but cloud for the sake of supporting a business process and effectively hosting the environment with the right service resilience, with the right performance, and ultimately with the intention that the investments we're making are in service to a greater goal, in this case, digital, and supporting the evolution of our business on a go-forward basis. Hopefully, Mark, that makes sense for you and the extended audience.
It certainly makes sense for me. Let's bring it to life, John, if we may. I do want to come to Darren, but I just want to hang here for a little bit longer. Can I press you, John, for a bit of an example? In my research for this session, that when I was finding out about CS Technology, I read some very interesting stuff about your work in the Nordic region. I think this plays into exactly the points that you're making. Could you elaborate on the problem statement, what you were trying to help the client achieve, and just dig into this a bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a great case study because it's a coming together. It's a mosaic of business change, supporting external regulator functions, and making sure that the bank is wholly resilient. And so one of the top banks in the region, Danske Bank, if you guys are familiar, the client was the chief operating officer. He's been a client at several financial services institutions. But one of the key things he had to drive was focus on performance of the mobile app and ultimately the features and functions that were there, and pressing that button, so to speak. The next was making sure that from a capabilities perspective that we understood from internal audit and external regulators, what were core services, call it the tier 0, tier 1 applications that supported those capabilities, and ultimately the resilience that supported them underneath from an infrastructure and asset point of view. And then the third piece was really transformation, right? From a technology perspective. And the way I look at transformation, right? Whether you're a technologist or you're a finance person, there's 3 legs on the stool, if not more, right? Which is there's the financial efficacy that governs what we do, how we do it from a business case point of view. There's the technical efficacy of the solutions, right? Because we can't solve for everything. And when we do try to solve for everything, it blows up the financial side, and it's the operational components as well, which is what capabilities exist. And if I'm deploying something where I don't have necessarily the capabilities, then it won't run effectively. And so when we look at these opportunities, especially at this specific bank, the opportunity over 18 to 24 months was, how do we do all of this at once? And so part of this started with discovery and understanding what those services and capabilities were. And as you can imagine, with any institution or most institutions, a lot of it resided in the heads of everybody within the organization. There was tribal knowledge everywhere. It was locked in spreadsheets or in PowerPoints. And at the end of the day, they didn't have much by the way of automation and capability from an operations point of view. Here comes a point where, inflection point where we go, in order to achieve the velocity that we want, in order to make change happen, in order to provide the visibility we want from executive level all the way down to the asset level, we engaged Cutover as the digital platform to house all that data. Now, why was that interesting? One, from a discovery perspective, the visibility and the relationship or correlation amongst CIs with the environment was critical to understanding it. Two, from an automation perspective, as we release and push out change, and Darren kind of talked about it with Ansible, Puppet, et cetera, it's not only about capturing the key processes that were once analog and mapping them out digitally to provide those run books, so to speak, but also how do we capture machine kickoff as well. So we helped instrument that environment. And then three, as we made change happen, we were able to sustain that change from a day two perspective. And even when the sudden outage or change management queue went awry, we now had the digital runbook to go back to. So mean time to resolution was resolved much faster than historically had been dealt with. And so when I look at these things end to end, the velocity of change happened much quicker from a digital front end perspective, and we were able to roll out, you could call it more feature functions from a consumer engagement perspective. Point two is on the operations point of view, we were able to automate, increase the speed and velocity by which we introduced change in the environment. And three was wholesale transformation, being able to deliver a hybrid cloud environment that ultimately supported applications based upon their affinities and ultimately attribution. And so all end to end, I think we made the best return, both from a CST and cutover perspective, in terms of return on invested capital and ultimately sustaining their competitive capability in region.
Great, thank you. And I just want to, I do want to give Darren the opportunity to come in on that. Darren, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, I'm assuming that these are perspectives that you share, but just one point from me, never underestimate the power of removal of tribal knowledge in terms of increasing your operational resilience. Darren, you and I were on a call recently, you called it head knowledge. It's the same thing, right? You get that out of people's heads in a tool set, do the same thing the same way. That has an astonishing impact on your levels of operational resilience. But Darren, do you share John's perspectives?
Yeah, you won't be surprised to hear that I do. I think, you know, what we see with our customers and those that we're engaged with is that they're all invested in a journey to the clouds. But I think it's fair to say that we see quite divergent levels of maturity in their respective program frameworks, in their adoption criteria, in their pace, and ultimately in their ability to successfully migrate. We do see a lot of stop, start, reverse course activities due to that lack of orchestration. And therefore, there tends to be a focus in those manually driven migration planning events and the execution of those. We also see teams that are burdened by a lack of planning insights, by not having the ability to visualize and see those scheduled events. And they're also burdened by a lack of understanding of those upstream and downstream interdependencies, by not having those same platform comms I alluded to earlier, those capabilities to report in real time on event status. And also not having real-time dashboards to report to exec stakeholders who quite reasonably have a vested interest in seeing a good outcome. And you know what, we want to show stakeholders what they're concerned with, but we also want to enable practitioners with dashboards and insights, enabling them to make educated decisions when things go awry and course correct, which, as we all know, we know that things do go awry. That always happens, no matter how well we seem to plan.
I mean, Darren, so well said. And as I like to say, we now have air traffic control-like capabilities to actually see events unfolding in real time to ensure accurate reporting and to enable identifying roadblocks or problems, both upstream and downstream, which enables you to pivot in real time. I mean, this has got to resonate with practitioners in all verticals. And where were these observability and enabled decision-making capabilities when we were in the command and control sheet?
You know, absolutely, Steve. I tend to concur completely. I think what's interesting as we've seen it over time is that the proliferation, I'll call it, of tools that have existed within the environment. For every organization that we've seen, there's been a dime a dozen of, hey, this tool was cool back in 2015 or this one in 2010. And next thing you know, there's no integrations. The guy or gal that once bought that tool is no longer there. And so what exists, I think, are, it's this combination of how do we augment human capability with orchestration platforms that integrate multiple points or sources of record. And what's interesting about it is that we found with Cutover in particular, Mark, from your prior questions, is that fundamentally Cutover can serve as that orchestration engine that interfaces with core ITSM platforms from discovery through to execution, and providing some of those core and easy out of the box integrations. I think that's the key, right? I think everybody on this call, if we ask them how do we want a monolithic stack that's easy to manage versus one that has multiple integrations or capabilities, obviously the one with multiple integrations is a challenge, but what we're starting to see now, and with the evolution of technology, is Cutover has made it super easy to integrate. And so from our perspective, when we're talking about application rationalization, we're talking migrations, being able to come out of the box with and being able to rationalize those components, provide the correct disposition, monitor their change over the course of time, and providing that audit trail, which is no doubt important to internal stakeholders as well as external, no matter what vertical you're in, I think has ultimately become one of the more critical reporting capabilities that we've seen come into the environment. And so I'm extremely bullish on providing those end-to-end capabilities, because I think it's the core to any kind of transformation that we try to enact on a go-forward basis.
Yeah, I'd say to stay with applications rationalization, John, because I'm fascinated by it. We see across all verticals, all industry sectors and segments at the moment, there is a real desire to differentiate yourself in the marketplace through exceptional world-class customer experiences and service. That's one of the main opportunities that I think a lot of firms has. But it's easy to say, very difficult to do, because in a crowded IT estate, that requires a laser focus on data, a laser focus on applications. What are you doing in terms of application rationalization? And then Darren, I'd be interested in the role that Cutover can play on that. Is there any more you can say on apps rationalization, John?
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing I would say is we've got to treat our organizations as data science hubs, if you will, right? Every day we're adding something new to the environment, and we have to understand the different data points that exist in their relationships. Think of it as a big graph. And fundamentally, that graph is formed through multiple data sources that exist today. Many people are focusing on the consolidation of those data sources into one platform, whether it's an ITSM platform like a ServiceNow or a Remedy. But fundamentally, when we think about the empirical analysis, it's understanding not only the relationship amongst those data points, but how they what are the dynamic changes that exist? What are the growth rates? What is the net impact downstream? There's a whole overlay of business, call it capabilities, that we need to understand in order to effectively provide the correct disposition, including finance, right? So as I said before, there's three legs on the stool. We look at the empirical data first and overlay the graph, if you will, with, I'll call it, core data that supports some of the business attributes, like cost and like revenue attribution or service resilience. But fundamentally, when we move towards the disposition piece, obviously there's still the qualitative aspect where most of this data still resides in the application development team's heads, and we have to go through a process of both getting it into a place where we have this digital orchestration. And that's where it becomes key that if you're going to launch one of these transformations, the velocity that you get starts up front. And drives all the way through, because without that source of truth, and without the orchestration engine or platform like a Cutover, we're not going to be able to deliver that change that we promised in the business case that we're ultimately going to develop. And so, as I said earlier, one of the key functions for us as an organization, and where I've pushed my organization to go, is one, you can no longer just be an advisor, right? You have to be able to take, historically it was, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, here's your PowerPoint and good day. And the terminal value of that thing went to zero. It's like the car that rolled off the lot. Next thing you know, it's worth 50% of what it was. And so the question is, how do you evergreen capability? And that's been the focus for us with Cutover in particular, is how do you take and create strategy as a service or Stratacution or whatever kind of name you want to make up, but how do you embed that as a part of your organization's DNA to make sure that we're iterating along the way? And so part of that is doing the hard work up front, but making sure we're maintaining that over time. And as a platform, and Darren will talk to this in just a second, Darren, from my perspective, that's where you guys fit in terms of the orchestration and providing that evergreen capability that no doubt is critical to making sure that we get continued returns on the investment dollars we're spending up front.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, John. And yeah, I mean, you'll know this. Our platform hosts thousands of our customers' runbooks, and they make use of that as a repository, a library, and they do that for a variety of purposes. All with that goal of getting that knowledge distilled out of people's heads into those runbooks, and the types of uses. Individual application migrations, data center migrations, your BCM and ITDR events, incident response, InfoSec and cyber, recovery testing, actual invocation events, and even tabletop exercises. So that rehearsing, that getting ready to execute should you need to do so in a live event, a live scenario.
Absolutely, no question, Darren. The good work that CST does in developing customer strategies around their production environment operating postures, their release change management capabilities, their cloud adoption strategies, cyber incident response capabilities. Cutover is the execution platform that can integrate with their customers' ITSM, DevOps, comms, and operational support tooling that they've already invested in and use every day. And that maximizes their overall spend and return on investment across the IT estate. And guys, we've had some great experiences with how CST is assisting customers on their transformational and operational resiliency journeys. And there's one common denominator that I think is an elephant in the room, and that's developing program frameworks. That's one of the foundational building blocks around developing a resilience culture, which is absolutely a growing trend, not only with FI constituents, but across industries in all verticals globally. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, well, let's confront the elephant then, Steve. Anand is on the chat asking some great questions, which we will get to. One of them was, can we talk a little bit more about operational resilience versus operational maturity? Talking about program framework, Steve, we had a conversation about the UK regulators' view that came out yesterday. I'm gonna move around this, and I'm gonna put a link to that white paper that came out yesterday here in the UK in the chat, because regulators are increasingly joined up when it comes to what is a program framework, impact tolerances for key business functions, as we've all been talking about, better business outcomes, as John has been saying. But let's delve into program frameworks a little bit. John, the journey to the cloud, or whatever it might be, I keep saying that because it's a nice phrase, but it's not always the journey to the cloud. The program, framework design development, how do you approach this from a frameworks perspective?
Look, I think there's reference models galore out there, right, that we can pick and choose from, whether it's a CMMI or it's an ITIL, you name it. There's ways to use frameworks and also to assess capabilities, right? I think that was part of the question, Mark. And so in terms of understanding the maturity of the organization, I think it starts with assessing what are those capabilities and services that we offer, and ultimately the component pieces that support them on an ongoing basis. Do we actually have, or can we measure a service or capability? Do we have SLAs in place? At the end of the day, I think part of this, when we talk to customers, the journey to cloud is a proxy for, I want to become a really good service provider. I can't tell you how many times we've walked into an organization where they've said, I want to be more like Amazon or Google or you name it. And it's like, hey, but we're starting off from ground zero. So how do we evolve and iterate over time? And I think it starts with understanding to the points that have been made. Where are we currently from a maturity perspective? What capabilities exist? How is their alignment with existing infrastructure today versus what I plan to implement in the future? How do I close the gap? And then what's that gap going to cost me, right? And so from our perspective, whether it's a journey to the cloud or it's journey to digital or just becoming operationally that much better or more excellent, it all starts with understanding and assessing that those core capabilities and specifically the services that you offer back to your client. And ultimately, what are the measures of success? How do I know I'm good relative to not only internally but also externally to my competitors? And so a lot of thought goes into that. I think also making sure that we have the correct platforms, right? So we look under one rock, we see X platform for orchestration. We have monitoring tools for network and storage, and you name it. We've got a whole bunch of things. We've got a hodgepodge. Let's make sure we're augmenting human capability with tools capability, and eventually getting to the point where we can say, oh, we can use AI and machine learning and all of the cool and interesting things. I think we have a, especially as you get more senior, right? And the board, we're on the airplane and we read the magazine on back and they say to the CIO, why aren't we more of us in the cloud, or why haven't we pushed automation further? And look, the risk is that many of the business people see this and they don't understand the gap. And so quite frankly, in order to set the right guidepost, it's one, understanding what you have current state, and ultimately defining, as I said earlier, those three legs around capability, maturity, and operations, technical and financial, to make sure that we're making the most informed decisions both now and as we evolve over time.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. For everybody's benefit, I've just put that regulatory white paper, the Prudential Regulatory Authority, the Financial Conduct Authority, the Bank of England released a white paper yesterday. That link is now in the chat box. Darren, this is quite timely because certainly when I was a practitioner, that was the overwhelming driver for why operational resilience programs were in place, why they were funded, why they got the resource and the board level attention. Are things changing? Are you starting to see other reasons for the adoption of tools like Cutover or the adoption of programs like operational resilience from other areas? I'll hazard a guess at something like cyber or InfoSec or perhaps even incident response. Is that right? Are you seeing a growing driver from those things?
Yeah, I know. I think that's fair. I think it's worth pointing out that the initial focus we had as a company for our products saw us selling to financial services customers for the very reasons we've just been talking about, as they sought to address all that regulators expect of them. But we have seen customers adopt our products across a variety of use cases, and indeed customers across a variety of industry verticals. And some of those use cases have been kind of interesting, some quite expected, so regular release and change. IPOs, we've got a customer that used us to coordinate IPO activity. In fact, that very same customer also used us for coordination of their approach and response to Brexit, specifically about novating derivative trades. They actually used us to coordinate that activity, which they did through 2019 and into 2020. But customers are also using us to implement standards for operation, but also defining program frameworks across InfoSec and cyber, BCM and incident response disciplines. And do you know what, these program frameworks are appealing to all verticals and industries because the challenges faced are similar across those, if not the same. And having a partner, to provide help and assistance with implementation of those frameworks is invaluable, as John has laid out so far today.
Yeah, no, and thanks, Darren. I think that resonates with us specifically around our core business model, which is obviously serving as a trusted advisor to many of our clients. And when we begin engagements, but whether it's helping define the strategy or helping them execute across that life cycle, it has to be, to your point, there has to be a focus on what are the use cases that we're solving for, how are we supporting them, and ultimately, how do we support the change on an ongoing basis to deliver those financial and technical outcomes that we all want and are seeking. I think it all starts, as I said before, it starts with understanding what are key metrics for the technology organization and for the business. Part of it is, as we said before, the theme is how business and IT are merging or becoming even closer today than they were 12 months ago. And so I think in terms of evolving towards becoming a better service provider, it requires us as technologists or us as business people to understand the inner workings from those service components all the way down through those asset layers, whether it's a data center or cloud environment, or it's a retail environment or a branch environment, or you name it. I think it all has to hum together. And so from our perspective, having those platforms in place, or as I said before, integrated with some of the core processes and making sure that they're digital, not analog, becomes that much more critical.
And John, I think you and Darren have done a fantastic job talking about program framework examples, cloud, DevOps, InfoSec, cyber, BCM, ITDR, all wrapped in a regulatory bow. That's where you're going to get the best outcomes. And frankly, if in the last 12 or 14 months, if we've learned anything, it's that being foundational to developing a resiliency culture is essential, both operationally, working remotely for the most part with our colleagues. I mean, that's been an essential learning curve. But just as importantly, for ourselves as people, with our families, our friends, having to continually adopt and adapt, as we've learned in extraordinary ways, just how resilient we all can be.
Yes, completely. Jens, I'd like to do another case study now, because I think that this is a great conversation, but let's just join the dots and bring this to life. I know that one of the projects that you both worked on was with, the client was one of the largest exchanges based outside of the US and North America. John, again, just outline the problem statement for us and how you approached it. And then Darren, I'll come to you if I may, just for the role that Cutover played in that. John, can you kick us off?
Yeah, sure, Mark, no problem. The exchange that Mark's referencing, obviously headquartered in Europe, but global business with multiple exchanges, and recently a merger with a significant market data player in the marketplace, right? So a multi-billion-dollar transaction. And what's interesting, our relationship started in the early, I'll call it our mid 2015, 16 time period, up until now with the advent of the merger. And what was interesting was when we first engaged, there was the focus on consolidation, optimization of run rate as it relates to OpEx, so that we could reinvest in transformational initiatives, and even more so providing the capability, right? As an exchange, providing services to the financial markets being one of the most critical capabilities and for stability of our global economy. One of the key attributes or asks from the regulators was being able to demonstrate failover and recover capabilities for those services should an outage take place, and ultimately how to demonstrate that on an ongoing basis. None of the tools, or very little tools or maturity process existed as it relates to being able to actually execute this. And given the nature of turnover and the evolution of technology, there were multiple elements to address, not only process automation, but also technical debt. And moreover, as I said before, turning your environment into a data science environment and understanding the different nodes and their relationships. And ultimately, if I moved one here versus another, what would be the performance impact to my environment overall? And so going through that process up front and then engaging Cutover as the orchestration engine, one, to help us deliver that change in the process from a failover and recovery perspective, two, to deliver the automation required to understand the various pieces, three, the run books that associated with those core services and those applications, and then lastly, being able to show off to the regulators and internal audit and the rest, hey, we've invested these dollars, and here, open the kimono, we're not scared anymore, come take a look. And so there's a sense of surety and certainty that comes from that. And then from there, there's a jumping off point that says, once I have all of that and I'm really good, then I can transform the environment. Because before it used to be, it's fiefdoms, right? I've got cyber data here, I've got application data here, I've got infrastructure data here. Now what we're seeing is the convergence of all these components and the necessity to make sure that we have all of this pulled together and automated. I think that was one of the keys that led to, one, a global consolidation, two, effective hosting of applications that meet performance needs of end users and customers, and then three, providing the returns that they were seeking for their business, and ultimately set them up for a better merger experience as we look to rationalize like for like in those environments and what the disposition should be on a short, medium, or long term. So overall, Mark, I have to say, and Darren, maybe you can comment on Cutover, specifically how we leveraged you guys inside of this exchange to deliver the value.
Yeah, no, happy to do that. I got to say, it was one of the most enjoyable engagements I participated in. I actually participated in the sales process. That doesn't happen for all customers, but for this specific one, it did. Probably the quickest sales process from start to finish. We had really good engagement from the customer. They pushed us to improve our product along the way, which we did as part of that engagement, that initial engagement with them. I think also it's worth pointing out they did have a tool in place, but hadn't been successful with it. And that tool was probably one of the best ones that we've seen. We do see an awful lot of sort of spreadsheets and project plans sort of cobbled together, but this was a very, very good tool. But even with that in place, they still hadn't managed to achieve what they wanted to. And it was really gratifying from our perspective to help them on that journey. And we did what we do with a lot of our customers. We supported them through their first event. So we gave them that comfort blanket, if you will, to go forward and execute and use our platform to do that. And they turned into one of our longest standing customers, and we're very grateful for that.
That's a great use case story, guys. And it's apparent that we've cut our teeth on the FI sector, typically more mature than other verticals from some operational resiliency perspectives due to the rigid regulatory focus. But that has served as the catalyst for why we are so excited about what CST and Cutover can bring to our manufacturing, retail, healthcare, services, logistics, supply chain, and in fact, all verticals. We can solve similar customer challenges across the disparate business units and IT estate together. And we're committed to delivering customer success to answer what does good look like across all new verticals, to answer the question of why operational maturity matters and how our partnership with John and CST can accelerate business outcomes and actually provide lifecycle operational resiliency adoption results.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Okay, so I said I had a number of jobs. One of them was to keep us all on topic, keep us to time. We're doing a fairly good job at this. I want to just tease out of each of you. Steve, I'll start with you, if I may. Just a couple of nuggets or takeaways that we can give to the audience who might be thinking, okay, so what does this mean for me? How do I apply this in my organization? What would you want them to be the two things that they take away from what we've discussed today?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a great discussion. Appreciate John and Darren's experiences and insights on this broad range of topical issues. And for me, the key nuggets are first, the program framework discussion, how CST and Cutover adoption across the regulatory codification or transformational disciplines provides that required plan, build, run structure and discipline. And then with BCM, ITDR program personas, program frameworks provide a standardized, repeatable execution posture. And that's a segue nicely into my second nugget, which would be the development of a resilience culture where everyone, mailroom to the boardroom, shares responsibilities and accountabilities to pull together as a team across the business units in the IT estate. And third, if you adopt the guiding principles that John and CST bring to the table with Cutover, then you'll have demonstrable confidence in your entire IT estate's execution capabilities, enabling you to continue on your journey of digital transformation with operational maturity built in. Instilling confidence in your operational maturity posture is truly a game changer. Those are my nuggets, Mark.
It is. Thank you, Steve. Darren, same question.
Yeah, I think, just touching on what John spoke about in terms of that customer we were just speaking about, I'd really encourage organizations to use that activity of change, of having to go on that journey of change to do something fundamental to change the culture in the organization, as Steve just referred to. And also, make use of partners where it makes sense to. I think that's the second takeaway I'd offer today.
Thanks, Darren. And last but not least, John.
Yeah, so Mark, I think I've got more questions for the audience that they can ask themselves upon the session. If you think about it, we go back to the beginning, we talked about the stool, right? And so if you ask yourself, how mature is our organization? What capabilities exist, and do we understand how well they're supporting? Do we understand the core KPIs that manage the business and technology relationship, and what governs those, and what frameworks are we using to keep us in line or to judge whether or not we've actually made the change, demonstrable change that we've seen? How do we measure it? What's the definition of done? those are all core things I would ask myself if I'm a leader in those organizations, because I think those things come first. I think also, to comment on Darren's piece, culture is king in this space. And specifically around adopting digital automation, it has to be a top-down exercise. There has to be a focus on it, and we have to deliver on the key results that our organization demands to see when it comes to investing in those spaces and those capabilities. So that's what I have to add today, Mark. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Steve, Darren, John. Wonderful. I have one more job for each of you, if I may. And on the point that you were making, John, about operational maturity and the cultural points that Steve was making again, let's just lead to some questions. I know that, Anand, you had some, and forgive me, I'm not looking at the camera, I'm looking at your questions now. I think you found the answers to some of your questions in the documents that we've put in the files tab. So I'd encourage each of you to have a look at those, because they may answer some of the questions. But David has asked a question, and Steve, I think this might be a good one for you. The question is, it sounds like the road to operational maturity starts with an upfront assessment or a capture of what you've got right now before you start down that path. Is there some form of rating that can give an organization an idea of how mature they may be or not? You and I have had a conversation about a maturity framework without being too specific or too scientific. It is a guide. It's not meant to give all of the detail, but could you just perhaps touch on the work that you've done in pulling that framework together to give David and some of the other guys a sense of what sorts of questions should you be asking yourself to get a sense of where you are on that maturity journey? Can you take that one, Steve? Is that all right?
Sure. I mean, I'll give it a stab. And then we worked on that house view of maturity model that we've put together for Cutover. So maybe we can make that available to
I think that's a good idea. Yeah.
Right. And I'd love to have a further conversation, but we put that together to really stimulate the conversation about transparency and confidence, right? We all have good content. We all have good processes, policies. We have good people. Is it all coming together from an orchestration and a transparency perspective of understanding your factual baseline? What are your current execution capabilities today from an operational resilience perspective? If we look at what we do from a DevOps or a testing perspective, it's to find the weakest link in the chain. Are we doing that? Are we just testing when we talk about BCM and ITDR to meet regulatory requirements? Are we testing for success? Things like that. So when we look at maturity, I think we used a scale of 1 through 5. Nobody's a true 5. Nobody is a true 5. But it gives you the opportunity to self-assess and be really transparent and self-aware as to where the gaps in your various elements of the program are. And that is a great method of stimulating dialogue internally with your executive stakeholders and with your practitioner stakeholders as to where you need to focus. So I think that's a great question, and we should actually make that available to anybody that came out, is our house view of operational maturity, and then happy to have follow-up conversations individually.
We'll do that, Steve. I'll make a note to make sure that happens. And just to link back to the case study, actually, the exchange, the desire, John used the phrase, the open kimono, this desire not to be afraid of shining a light on where you currently are versus where you think you'd like to be. Nobody's a 5. You may not need to be a 5 either. That's the other thing, isn't it? It doesn't matter what the number is. You know, you do it for what's important to you. But I think a lot of these webinars that I've listened to recently, this theme comes up increasingly. It's that notion of failing better, of not being afraid of things going wrong, of trying to look for the weaknesses in your operation, where the plumbing fits together. A lot of that tribal knowledge that John talked about, or the head knowledge that Darren's talked about in the past, a lot of the testing that was done when I was a practitioner, I'm sure you'll all recognize this, was a whole bunch of IT guys with 16 weeks of planning have got a really good following wind of doing a test. What does it prove? Not that much. It's an exercise in administration. Real maturity is when you're, and I'm not suggesting that people should adopt the chaos monkey approach, but a lot of people are. The industry is moving in that direction. We're not afraid to say what we're not able to do, or at least we shouldn't be. The regulators are changing. You can see the guidance that's coming out of the UK. It's getting more of an expectation that things will break. So what will you do when it does? And I think Anand asked a question about the difference between resilience and maturity. You know, the resilience bits will be the three legs of the stool that John talked about. Maturity will be how stable that stool actually is. And you'll all be at different levels of maturity in your organizations and indeed in sectors. That's okay. The framework that Steve's talking about, the house view, is Cutover's view as to how you might build up what the right level of maturity is for you. You don't want to throw money after bad. You don't want to over-engineer things that don't need to be over-engineered. But I think it starts, David, to your question, with where are we, where would we like to be, and how long is that going to take us to get there? That's not a once and done exercise, just like risk management, just like BCM, just like ITDR. It goes on, it never stops. It's part of culture. It's part of who you are as organizations. Darren, I don't know whether there's anything you want to chime in on that. I do have a question that I think might be for you, but is there anything you want to add on that?
No, go for the question.
Okay, so a question from Anand. You're running a lot of customer success manager at Cutover. The question is, and again, forgive me for taking away from the camera for a second. Anand asks, how are customers starting to try this platform out? Are they piloting it in non-revenue generating teams and functions first? Are they doing it based on organizational size? Say, would you go for 50 people or fewer in a team, try it out there? How do people approach this? Do they start off small and get braver, more confident, and then roll it out bigger? Or do we go straight in at the deep end? I'm guessing it differs depending on the organization.
Yeah, it does exactly. It really does depend upon the culture. We've got one customer who are a little more gung-ho in their approach and are, sort of all in whatever they do, and particularly in how they use Cutover. There are other customers that do operate a little more cautiously. The one thing I would say about resilience is it's hard to do that piecemeal. It's hard to do that sort of one piece by one piece. You tend to have to demonstrate resilience across a business line, across a data center, across a suite of applications. So it's hard to make a switch to a new tool or a new platform and or process at the same time without doing it somewhat wholesale. We do have prospective customers who go through a proof of value process, and that typically is a look back at an event that they've executed using spreadsheets or whatever tooling that they've got, and we take that process, what they've executed, pump it into Cutover, and then walk them through that same event so they can see the difference they get from using the platform. So it's many different ways for many different customers. There's not really one way that all go for.
John, would you recognize that? Sorry, Steve.
No, sorry. Before I pivot over to John, I just wanted to say, and John, you'll get this as well. I mean, I'm having more business-centric conversations around the supply chain about the work from home strategy. Well, that was my business continuity strategy. So now what do I do? What do I pivot from that? So we've talked a lot about the IT estate because it's the catalyst for all things that drive the business. But I can't tell you that 80% of the conversations that I'm having, and John, the ones that get you the tip of the spear, they're all centered around how to improve business efficiencies, cost optimization, digital transformation. That drives the enablement of IT. So there's a ton of personas that are business centric, Mark, that are coming out, and Darren, we're working hand in hand on those. But John, I mean, do you see the same thing? If I can pivot to you for a sec.
I do. And the challenge, I think, always becomes everybody wants to invest in the bright, shiny objects too, to get the returns. And I think the bright, shiny object always wins the day when it comes to that process stuff, or it comes to that DR BCP stuff that Mark referenced earlier. I think it kind of runs second to some of the other capital initiatives that an organization may have to deliver. And so from the perspective of being able to look at the resilience of the organization, specifically from the most called senior, most critical layers, all the way through, I think becomes ultimately the most important capability, along with integrating the process perspective, right? And I think that's one of the questions I see Raphael come up with, that controls, IT controls and resilience run hand in hand. If I just have resilient infrastructure without the controls and processes that govern what happens within my IST estate, we've got an imbalance. And so from that perspective, we're seeing a ton, and we're seeing a lot in particular. I think the regulators all gather and they say, hey, how can we challenge these organizations? Because it'll typically mean we'll collect some money. But the challenge that thematically that we see are around things like cyber resilience and controls and making sure that those things all manifest. And I think being able to to catalog and have a rigorous approach, leveraging platforms like Cutover, and ultimately doing a lot of the hard work up front, I think becomes the ultimate answer in terms of addressing capabilities and evolving them over time.
Great answer, John. And Raphael's question, for those of you who can't see the box, is: are you guys seeing on the market anyone talking about an intersection between resilience and internal controls? I think, John, the point John made is absolutely right. And I think the point about cyber and the journey that the regulator has been on, I think, is giving you a lot of the answers to this, because that statement of you should expect things to go wrong, you should expect to have infosec problems, cyber attacks. Therefore, the natural evolution of that is an increase in internal controls, because you need data, you need to be able to monitor, you need to be able to have some kind of stake in the ground that says this is my baseline in terms of problems. So yes, absolutely, Raphael, I think that's a great question. Those things will naturally, to my view, come closer together as we go on this journey of we should expect bad stuff to happen, right? Patty said, very interested to see that Cutover model, the house view, Steve. So there's clearly an appetite for that, which is great. We've got a couple of minutes left. Just a bit of a call to action before I thank everybody on everybody else's behalf. Do please stop by the booth and leave your business cards there. We do have some prizes to give away. Everybody loves a bit of merch, a bit of swag these days. We've got some stuff to give away as a thank you for your time. If you haven't had the opportunity to ask a question, or if you'd like to ask it privately, you can get in touch with either of us, either via LinkedIn, or you can email the guys at Cutover via news@cutover.com. I can't see any other questions. Apologies if I've missed them. I will go through this once this session has been closed and make sure that we can offer an answer to you by the back end. We will find a way to get that house view maturity out. But firstly, Steve, Darren, John, on behalf of the audience, thank you very much for your input and your insights today. It's been a fascinating conversation. And on your behalf, I would like to thank the audience who have sat patiently, listened, have asked some great questions. Do please stop by the booth, give us your card. We will see you all, no doubt, at some point on a screen at another DRJ event or another webinar coming very soon. But for now, thank you very much for your time. Please stay safe, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much. Thank you, gents.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.